Thanks for joining us on TVC News at noon. Let's begin with updates from the inaugural Federal Executive Council meeting chaired by President Bola Tinubu on Monday. The president charged ministers to look beyond titles and offices and stay focused on a day-to-day task to transform the economy. President Tinubu also told the ministers that the country would rely on their experience and intellect to make headway in the challenging times. TVC News State House correspondent Femi Akonde reports.
The inaugural Federal Executive Council meeting to draw the roadmap for economic growth and national development. With high expectations and a clear target set by President Bola Tinubu, the road ahead will definitely be long and tough. The ministers will work out how the country can wriggle out of a debt crisis that is serviced with about 90% of the country's revenue.
To reform economy to deliver sustainable and inclusive growth, strengthen national security for peace and prosperity. Without security, there can be no investment. We must unlock the energy and natural resources of this country. We must start to produce for ourselves.
After the meeting of the Federal Executive Council, ministers disclosed the outcome of their deliberations and the resolutions reached. The Minister of Finance and Coordinating Minister of the Economy is driving the charge to revamp the economy and to do so without resorting to external borrowing.
And those are basically food security, ending poverty, economic growth and job creation, access to capital, particularly consumer credit, improving security, improving the playing field on which people and particularly companies operate, rule of law, and of course, fighting corruption.
The bias is towards action so that we get things done. I think it's very clear that the President wants us to domesticate our efforts within our own national context, but also to be very practical in the interventions that we make. And with those marching orders, we now have our work cut out for us and will continue to refine as the Coordinating Minister of the Economy indicated.
The Federal Executive Council meeting examined the President's 8 key priority areas that will be the base upon which this administration will develop a plan to stimulate growth and development. The mandate for the ministers across sectors is to create more jobs, ensure food security, and improve the well-being of citizens.
Mr. President manifesto during his campaign, he promised 50 million jobs, and that's our target. And we will take it in phases. We're looking at different sectors of the economy that will contribute to this job creation. Chief among them is the creative industry and the digital economy. And then the agri sector and agro-processing zone, and mining, oil and gas. So we are very, very confident that we will achieve this.
As cabinet members, we have made our commitments to Mr. President, and I'm sure he's equally pleased with the kind of commitments that we have laid out today. And God willing, we should be able to achieve those targets within the shortest possible time.
The days ahead will be tough as time begins to count. The performance of the ministers will be closely watched by President Bola Tinubu, and the impact of the policy execution will be measured by Nigerians. Femi Akonde, TVC News, Abuja.
CEO of Leeds Network Africa, Chukwuma Okenwa, is in Enugu and he joins me on the news for this. Thank you so much for joining us on the news this time. President Bola Tinubu has given a marching order to the ministers to roll out policies and programs within weeks to turn around the economy. And how sacrosanct do you consider the 8 priority areas and identified targets to deliver in the next 3 years?
I consider those areas as identified by Mr. President as very, very pivotal to driving our economy. And I love the analogy the President used, identifying himself as the driver and of course the ministers as the conductor. And he wasn't mixing words. It wasn't in any way like beating about the bush like in this inaugural meeting, which all Nigerian actually looked up to see what the policy thrust of Mr. President would be. And of course, he recognized that currently economically, we are in a state of emergency. And we also need to do anything as possible to revive the economy. And Mr. President is not saying he's going to do that alone. He's actually banking, trusting on the capabilities of people he has appointed into his cabinet to help transform the economy.
The administration also said the removal of fuel subsidy means it would not rely on borrowing. Recall that the president also recently said Nigeria's debt servicing is about 90%. What would you rather they do to generate enough revenue while then cutting the cost of governance?
Well, I think also like Mr. President had identified yesterday, that of course the removal of the subsidy would make investors to come in because of course the issue of dollars and an easy exchange rate within Nigeria has been largely unified between the I&E exchange window and of course the banks. So that is quite commendable. That can boost investors' confidence to come invest in the country. And with that, we can earn more. And I also love the fact that he's trying to leverage on the population of young persons by promising to create 50 million jobs. And what that will mean is more of internally generated revenues and, of course, more stability for our naira.
Interesting. The president also read riot acts to the ministers, saying that he will hold them to standards. So what do you think the key performance indicators should look like in terms of being able to track their deliverables? Maybe should it be in terms of monthly? Should it be fortnightly? Should it be 6 months time? You know, how should Nigerians begin to measure the Tinubu meter, exactly the Tinubu meter on how they are delivering on these mandates?
Of course, economic progress is tracked quarterly. That means if you want to judge whether a nation is growing or whether it's recessing, you look at the quarterly growth or the quarterly decline. So 3 months is good enough. So we want to see more jobs created. We want to see the naira more stabilized against the dollars. We want to see, more of some of those incentives that Mr. President is rolling out, revitalize the economy. We want to see the stability of infrastructural development to attract investors. We want to also see the Ministry of Trade and Investment begin to reach out to stakeholders. You don't wait for investment to come. You reach out. You have to woo people to come invest in Nigeria. And as they bring those hard currencies, it will certainly stabilize our economy.
So what is the role of the National Assembly in all of this? Because if they present something to the president that they want to do, from the executive aspect, in angle, what about the National Assembly, who would also prepare budgets and ensure a proper appropriation? Are you looking forward to better synergy, not only interministerial, but then between the executive and then the National Assembly in order to deliver on these promises to Nigerians?
Really, not only are we looking forward to that, it is reasonably expected as the representatives of the people to facilitate policies. When the president comes up with good policies, he shouldn't have to wait for long to get the needed attention. And as a matter of fact, also we want to see a National Assembly that will play more oversight function. We can't just leave all of the work for Mr. President, where maybe he's trying to track whether the ministers are actually living up to expectation or not. He has his own role as Mr. President, but of course we want to see more of the representative of the people play the oversight function. And working together in concert with Mr. President, we can have more efficiencies at the level of the ministries. And of course, the same way the Mr. President is putting much upon the ministers are also expected to revive the civil service. They are not going to do that alone. They have the ministries, the departments and agencies. And how efficient you are going to be as a minister will be a function of your teammanship, ability to come up with reforms that will actually ensure that the civil service under you is very efficient. And with that, we can have more deliverables.
All right, the CEO of Leeds Network Africa, Chukwuma Okenwa, thank you so much for your insight on this. Thank you.
Thank you.
Now, here in Lagos, Speaker of the State Assembly, Mudashiru Obasa, says the decision to disqualify 17 commissioner nominees was borne out of their constitutional responsibility. This reaction is coming following widespread criticism against the decision of the lawmakers to reject some of the nominees sent by Governor Babajide Sanwo-Olu. Abimbola Agbebi reports.
Recording of official list of nominees for appointment as commissioners and special advisors.
It all started on the 3rd of August when 39 names of commissioner nominees were forwarded to the lawmakers by Governor Babajide Sanwo-Olu for approval. The list was immediately faulted by some of the lawmakers who shared their reservations at the plenary, which had the Speaker pleading for the lawmakers' understanding, asking that the detailed information about the nominees be sent to the House to aid its legislative assignment. A 12-man ad hoc committee headed by the Chief Whip of the House, Fatai Mojid, was set up to begin the screening of the nominees, an exercise that lasted 4 days. At the plenary on Wednesday, the 23rd of August, the report of the ad hoc committee was presented to the House, after which 22 of the 39 names of commissioner nominees forwarded to it for approval were confirmed. 17 others were rejected. Nominees like Akin Abayomi, a former commissioner for health in the state, were among names that were disqualified by the lawmakers. This unprecedented move has got many talking, raising the issue of possible face-off between the two arms of government. The Speaker of the House, Mudashiru Obasa, has a response to these insinuations.
We are placing politics ahead of technocrats. What technocrats? What do you mean about technocrat? Who is not technocrat in these hollow chambers? Before them, we have many people. They talk about Dr. Akin Abayomi, a gentleman, who happens to be a colleague also in serving the people. But before him, we have Leke Pito, we have Dr. Idris, we have many of them. Before COVID, which happened to be an isolated case, we have Ebola, which was also taken care of under Fashola. It's not about qualification. It's not about your experience. It's not about exposure. We are the representative of the people, the mouthpiece, the ears, and the sights of the people. So we know what we look for. We talk about Aramide, the commissioner for what? Before him, we did Ikoyi, Victoria Island Link Bridge under Fashola, when the current deputy governor, Amsa, was the commissioner for works. The House, as a body, restrained itself from exposing what we discovered during the screening exercise. So we are not going to be forced to spill.
With recent developments, the fate of the 17 rejected commissioner nominees still hang in the balance. Abimbola Agbebi, TVC News, Lagos.
Now, the federal government has set up an interagency collaboration to ensure effect of the opening of the Lagdo Dam in Cameroon does not become fatal in Nigeria. This follows warnings that intense flooding will be experienced in some states in the next 7 days. Mayor Thomas has the story.
The federal government on Monday confirmed that Lagdo Dam has been opened by the Cameroonian authorities and that all the frontline states may experience flooding within the next 7 days. It is a matter of grave concern that had prompted the first collaborative meeting between the Ministers of Water Resources, Environment and Humanitarian Affairs and Poverty Alleviation. The aim is to find a solution to the perennial flood problems in Nigeria. The ministers acknowledge it is a collective responsibility and the bulk of the work is at the state and local government levels. They want individuals also to take preventive measures such as clearing drainage and keeping their environment clean.
We are going to be working with the state government and even the local governments to provide this temporary shelter for them. This is part of the humanitarian intervention in those areas. Of course, we had mentioned other interventions, including food and the rest of them. State governments have actually been responsive. However, it has not been very adequate to cater for all the persons affected. And so we are encouraging the Nigerian Governors Forum to step up on its actions.
Removing unwanted structures that are blocking waterways, and also keeping the environment clean to reduce the menace of flooding, as the government at its own end is putting 1 or 2 measures in place for total eradication of this flooding.
We are issuing hourly warning alerts on floods, not only with respect to the River Benue, but in most parts of the country, including River Niger, and even in the south of Nigeria, we're issuing hourly alerts.
The ministers are quick to assure that the water level is not a threat yet, and that measures are just being put in place should rain volumes increase. The meeting has now gone into a closed-door session where they will come up with recommendations to be forwarded to President Bola Tinubu on efforts to mitigate and prevent further flood disasters in Nigeria. Moya Thomas, TVC News, Abuja.